Brent wailed and wailed. Tears streamed down his face in a flood, until his howls seemed to echo like emptiness in a dark cavern that only answered with laughter, his wails echoing like laughter from an endless cavern, like the emptiness of his heart, just empty echoes and a long tunnel of broken dreams. And the foul smell of excrement as Laurie's leftovers stained brown on his sheets. Never in his life had he ever been violent or vulgar, traits he despised. For this reason her drug rape traumatized him, making him feel like a monster in his own body, a monster that he abhorred, Laurie's new creation, the monster who became Brent as he made love to Laurie, horrified him so much that he longed to crash his face that he now saw in the mirror as the most abominable and horrid face he'd ever seen. He felt he didn't deserve to live. He, the monster he'd become, must die, must suffer torments for the terrors he had inflicted on all that was beautiful, on all that made life worth living. He loathed his existence, hated what he'd become. He, a monster, deserved to die. Laurie seemed to feed on his loathing and terror, how he now abhorred the vile reptile he had become. Goal accomplished, she licked her chops, savored her victory, gloating that she had shattered all his goodness, all that Gail could love in him, and had transformed him into a battered shell, so that when the good man came back into existence and saw what an evil reptile he'd become, and what that reptile had done with the good man's body, the good man recoiled in horror, gasping for breath, hardly breathing at the audacity of the reptile's deeds. The reptile's vileness so tormented him, he began eyeing the drawers, mulling over in his mind how he could crush that reptile out of existence by slashing his wrist, to stop forever that vile body that committed such terrors. His heart sentenced that reptile himself to the fires of hell. Brent, the reptile, had become a smelly worm that slithered in sewage. Laurie's laughter, ha 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 ha, seemed to enrage the heavens and stir all the demons in hell, who gloated over their victory because they had overcome a love that towered to the heavens, defiling it with vulgarities, so that Brent's sheets smelled of sewage. The foul smell raked his sinuses, stuffy from crying for hours and hours, while Brent wailed from a bottomless pit over the loss of all that had made his life worth living. Laurie's wink and smile as she exited her crime scene ensured Brent that she had more plans to ensure her devastation of the good man who wanted to marry Gail would be complete. Oh God, Gail must not see me so vile, so disgusting, mutilated, deformed, a monster. That's what I am now. The Jesuit higher-ups at Paramount Studios assigned Laurie McBride as Brent Spiner's publicist just months before she became his stalker in September 1992. As his publicist, she would now be allowed access to Brent while he worked at Paramount Studios and would forever change the landscape of Brent's life. To this day, those 3 weeks of September 1992, while Brent filmed a fistful of datas for his role on Star Trek The Next Generation, continued to devastate him. Laurie McBride's drug rape of Brent, using brain control on him, so that when he made love to Laurie he thought Laurie was Gail, left scars in his heart and soul so deep that Brent, who had never contemplated suicide, would contemplate it almost every day, the only thing stopping him, the thrill and majesty of Gail's love. Over the years he would deny the rape, or at least most of it. It didn't happen. It was only 1 day, not 3 weeks. Nothing so grotesque and violent could he have allowed. He would never betray the woman that he'd crawled 10 miles on his knees to see his Gail, with such a horrid act. Not for 3 weeks. I was so excited last night because I finally finished my audiobook book for The Forbidden Abyss Part 1, Brent Spiner and Vladimir Putin. And so I decided to dress up a little bit for this occasion. And you just heard a sample, my audio, a 5-minute audio sample, and I have submitted the book to Audible, and it will probably be up within 2 weeks at Audible and iTunes and the other sites uh, the where I have an exclusive contract with Audible and ACX, and I let them. They have exclusive rights to market my book, so that I trust Amazon. So that's just the way I prefer to go. I have this week has been really revolutionary for me. For one thing, I've been following Jesus's Gail commandments, and there's a link for that underneath this video so you can see what they are. And I found that this has put some structure into my life so that I'm less likely to waste my time in foolishness, like too much time surfing on the net or too much watching news. It's mostly Jesuit news. It's a waste of my time to watch Jesuit news, except maybe to get a kind of a sense of what the Jesuits are really up to, because they don't report the news. They report Jesuit propaganda, and Donald Trump, and the presidential election here in America is really big. And I've noticed the Jesuits don't seem to like Donald Trump, which makes me think that maybe he's okay. I asked Brent Spiner, about which presidential candidate is good, and he says he's neutral. He doesn't want to take a position. He says that Bernie Sanders is a very humble man. He said that Hillary Clinton has always been one of my staunchest supporters, and he didn't really have much to say about Donald, but he seemed to like Dr. Ben Carson. He said that because he's a doctor himself, that he is kind of partial to Ben Carson. Of course, Ben is no longer in the race, and Ben is apparently a good man. So anyways, I voted for Donald Trump, but I would like to say this. I don't think anybody is qualified to vote in the U.S. presidential election unless you have read my book, The Forbidden Abyss Part 1. And it's in 2 versions. There's a very long version, which is The Forbidden Abyss Part 1, 1990 to 2011, which basically covers the history of myself, Brent Spiner, and Vladimir Putin from 1990 to about 2012-ish. But because the last half of that very long book was mostly devoted to the 2011 Quebec trial, and you can get that entire trial on YouTube at Judge Terrence Jenkins' YouTube channel, I decided against making the second half of the book into an audiobook. And instead of taking another tack, what I'm going to do is I've already made the audiobook and I've submitted it to ACX and Audible, and they're right now doing a quality check to make sure it meets their requirements. That I have to, when I make an audiobook, I first do a reading, then I have to go back and edit my audio file to make it fit the ACX submission requirements. Like it has to be a certain range, and I can't have any click noises in the background, and I have to make sure I've got some room tone at the head and at the tail and so forth. So it takes a while. It's actually a lot of work to make an audiobook. And when I read for the part, I actually use a lot of the same technique that I do as a writer, and that is I get into character. And the way a writer gets into character when they write on the page is they study the history of the character and just try to put themselves in that character's shoes as if they are that person, they have that history. And you kind of like lose yourself into that person as you write them on the page. And that's very similar to the Stanislavski technique, or kind of like method acting. So when I read out loud, I kind of like use that same mindset to get into the character, to read for my, to read my story. And actually, a lot of actors do voice work in audiobooks. So it's a form of acting. So I'm using my acting skills, where I borrow some techniques that I use for my writing to get into character. And that's how I read my part.
And so anyways, the audiobook's out. I'm really excited. I think I did a really good job. And Brent tells me I've already won some Oscars for some of my readings, audiobooks. Of course, you'll never hear about that in the Jesuit news. So that's out. My next project's going to be, I'm going to make an audiobook for Brent Spiner's Flames. So after you listen to the Forbidden Abyss Part 1, Brent Spiner Vladimir Putin, then I'm going to make an audiobook for Brent Spiner's Flames, which covers the budding correspondence I had with Brent and Vladimir and Gerard Butler in the summer of 2011 and the Quebec trial. And that's going to be my substitute for the second half of the Forbidden Abyss Part 1, the very long book, which I'm not reading. What I'd like people to do is listen to the first half in audio, then listen to Brent Spiner's Flames in audio, then go to Judge Terrance Jenkins' YouTube channel and listen to the actual Quebec trial. I'll have a link for that underneath this. That's better than me reading it because that's an actual recording. Then after that, listen to the audio for Jesus the Eternal Bridegroom and Robin Williams' Murder, The Shimmering Sea, and you're going to have a very good history. I think anybody who votes in any U.S. presidential election, or if you live in any country that's influenced by Russia or by Me and My Men, which is just about the whole world, if you don't know our story and the true story about Vladimir Putin and Brent Spiner, which is nothing like is portrayed in Jesuit news, you are not qualified to vote. You don't know what's going on. Because we are the prime target of the Jesuit order, and if you don't know about us, then you don't know what's really going on in the world. So I really encourage you, if you want to be an intelligent voter, to listen to our story. I've made it very interesting. I'm a good reader. Like I said, I've won Oscars for this, Brent told me. And of course, it's secret ceremonies that you never hear about in the mainstream. So, also, Terrance Jenkins, Jesus went to Terrance and said, tell Gail about myfitnesspal.com. That is the best website to go to if you want to manage your weight in a healthy manner. And this is what I look like right now. And I'm happy. I'm 133 pounds. I've decided if I weigh between 130 to 139, don't sweat it, Gail. After I felt so crappy because I went on this diet I went up to 140. And I thought, what am I doing wrong? And I thought it was allergy. I thought it was allergy weight gain. And I started eating these strange foods like nutritional yeast and stuff, to try to help me to follow these diets to help me be thin and beautiful and healthy and all this. And I think anytime anybody's been infected with yeast like I have, you need to be very careful with what you eat. Because just about everything is yeast food. Like the yeast toxin is designed to absorb when your body gets off balance, the yeast toxin absorbs that, and that increases the amount of the yeast toxin in your body. And then the yeast toxin can actually cause imbalances in your body. I have a link underneath this video that if you have been infected with this super yeast, you need to visit my health page and check out the link. Because like if you take probiotics with this yeast, you feed the yeast toxin. If the yeast toxin absorbs a lot of things or you feed the yeast, these yeast eat up the good bacteria in the gut. That's their food. So if there's too many good bacteria in there, you cause an increase of the bad yeast. So people like me, we can't follow the standard protocol for normal people who haven't been infected with the yeast. Basically, following the Gail commandments is the best way for somebody with a history of super yeast infection to stay healthy. So anyways, check out my book. I'm really, really excited about it. I did a really good job. It's going to be up in about 2 weeks. Believe me, I'm such a good reader that when you listen to me read, it's almost like watching a movie.